What's up everybody, welcome back. So today we're gonna finish up the weapon wheel. We made quite a bit of progress, but there is still quite a bit of work left as well. So first of all, we're gonna add the little widget in the center here that gives a little bit of information about the weapon we are hovering or the weapon we have equipped if we are replacing a weapon. And then we also need to take care of the widget to replace weapons if our inventory is full. So for example, if I pick up 3 weapons right now, you will see the print in the top left to say inventory full, add widget later, so we need to do that as well. So let's just dive into it and see if we can get things done today. One little note, if you want to download the project files, you can become a member of the YouTube channel or become a Patreon, and then you will get access to the premium channels in the Discord, and there will be a download for the project as well. So let's dive into the project and today's video. So we need to start in the weapon wheel widget, and we're going to add the little widget in the center. So let's open up the widget, and we're going to add a border. So let's drag in a border on top of our canvas panel. So let's rename it first. This is going to be the border for the weapon information current. So border underscore weapon info current. So we're going to make this border a variable, and by default we're going to set it to hidden, and then I'm going to make it black and give it a little bit of alpha. There we go. So for the anchors, align it to the center, and then I'm going to set the position to 0. I'm going to make it 190 by 190, and then alignment 0.5, so it should be centered in the center of the weapon wheel. And then we are ready to start filling up the border. So we're going to grab a vertical box and simply drop it on top of here. And then inside of the vertical box, we want to add some text stuff, and those need to be variables. So let's just grab one from over here, for example. So we have the text weapon DPS. I can just grab this one, copy it, then go to the vertical box and paste it. So the first one we're gonna add in here is the weapon name. So let's rename it first, text weapon name. And then it's inside of the weapon wheel, so I'm gonna add underscore wheel behind here. So let's see, we want to make it a variable, and it is, so that's good to go. Then for the text, we can pretty much put something in here that doesn't really matter, text. So we want to set the justification to center, and then I'm going to shrink it down a little bit, so I'm going to make these 14. And that should be good to go. So let's duplicate this one. And then the second one is going to be the text for the DPS. So that's going to be weapon DPS for the wheel. There we go. And then we also want to make one for the damage and for the ammo. So let's duplicate it one more time. This is going to be damage for the wheel, and then for the ammo we want to put it in a horizontal box, so we can put the current ammo and the maximum ammo in there. So first of all, let's duplicate this one more time, and this one doesn't need to be a variable, so I'm just going to say text ammo and then turn off variable. So for the text I'm going to type ammo over here, and then I'm going to grab the horizontal box from this widget. So we have the ammo in here, and we have a horizontal box, text ammo, and then for the ammo and the maximum ammo. So I'm going to copy this horizontal box, go back to my vertical box and paste it in here. So we don't need this first one that says ammo, so let's delete that one, and then make sure we resize these. So select all 3 of them. I'm going to set them to 14 as well. And then justification centered. And obviously that doesn't work, so we can set the horizontal box to fill. And then center over here. So that's a bit better. And then we could add a few spacers in here. So for let's start by grabbing all of these text variables and the horizontal box. And for the vertical alignment, let's make it top align, so they don't stretch out as much. And then we can grab a spacer if we would like to. So that's in optimization, I think. No, primitive, possibly. There we go. So we could space them out a little bit, so I can add a little spacer above over here and make sure we have a bit of room above the first text, so we can expand the size of the spacer. Oh, I actually dropped it inside of the wrong box, so I dropped it in the wrong widget. So make sure you drop it in the correct vertical box. There we go. So now you can see it's over here as well. And we actually pushed the text down a little bit, so that's good to go. Then I want to duplicate the spacer and I'm going to move it below the weapon name. And in here, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. There we go. And then I'm going to add a third spacer right above the ammo. So duplicate it again, drag it above the, above the ammo text. And then we can space that out a little bit as well. So then we have the weapon name, the DPS and the damage, and the ammo over here. So that's going to be the widget part. I think we should be good to go over here. Yeah, that looks fine. So let's compile and save it and start setting this up. So let's dive into the graph. And first of all, we need a function to update all of the information on this weapon card. So let's create a new function, and I'm going to call this one update weapon info current. So update weapon info underscore current. And let's start with this function. So we're going to add one local variable in here, and that's going to be the local weapon row name. And that's a name variable. So the first thing we're going to do in here is set that variable. So drag it in with a setter, connect it up, and we're going to set it to the hovered slot index. So we're going to grab the weapon loadout from the player and get a copy from the hovered slot index over here. So that's the button of the weapon wheel we are currently hovering. We're going to plug it in here. And then we need to know which slot we are hovering. So we're going to grab the hovered slot index again, drag it in here, and we're going to switch on it. Switch on integer. So we have slot 0, 1, 2, and 3. So let's add those pins. And then the hovered slot index can also be -1 if we aren't hovering any slot. So let's leave the default pin in here as well. And we're going to grab the local weapon row name again. Drag it in here and compare it. So let's say if it's equal to, and then type in empty. So if this is empty, we're going to plug this into a branch, connect it up here. So we only want to do this empty check for slot 0, 1, and 2. So those are the weapon slots. The third one is going to be the equipment slot, and we're going to set that up later because we don't have an equipment inventory yet. So for that one, we're going to skip it, and for the default pin, we can skip it as well. Now we're going to grab the border for the weapon info current. So that's the new widget part we just created. Border weapon info current, drag it in here, and we're going to set the visibility. So if the slot is empty, then we actually want to hide the border. So we're going to connect it up, and we're going to set it to hidden. And then we're also going to connect the default pin over here. And we're going to connect the number 3 slot. So in that case, we don't need to show the border. And for the other cases, we want to set it to visible. So set visibility again. This time set it to visible and plug it into the pulse pin. So if we want to show the border, we need to actually populate all the text and stuff in there. So then we're going to grab the weapon row name again from the local variables. And we're going to get a table row. So this goes into the visible branch, and we can just stop executing the other one. That's good to go. So we need a data table for the weapon information, and then we can break the out row just like this. And we can simply start setting up all of the text and stuff. So let's start with the weapon name. We're going to grab the text for the weapon name and then the wheel one. So let's look up text weapon name wheel, drag it in here, and we're going to set the text, plug it into the row found pin, and then grab the display name from the info table. So that's good to go. Then we want to drag in our get weapon damage function, and we already added that in the previous episode of the series, so we can just drag it in. We can grab the is shotgun pin and then the weapon damage, so this will output the correct damage, and then we can use that to set the text. So now we can grab the text for the weapon wheel damage. So text weapon damage wheel, drag it in, and we're going to set the text again. And then we can make a little format text node to make it look a little bit better. So do format text, and we can type damage, and then open bracket A, close bracket. And then we can plug the damage into the A pin, and it will create a toText variable. No, it doesn't. So let's just drag off the damage output, and we're going to grab a toText node ourselves. So otherwise we're going to end up with a float, and it's going to say 10.0, for example. So that doesn't really make sense. So if we use a toText node, we can make sure that it doesn't display any values behind the dot, the comma, behind the decimals, you know. Okay. So that's done. Weapon damage is set as well. So then we want to set the DPS. So let's grab the set text node again, paste it over here, and we're going to set the text weapon DPS for the wheel. So we're going to plug that over here into the target. And then for the DPS, we actually want to grab the fire time from the data table. And we're going to do a divide. And then we're going to move the pin over to the lower pin. So we're going to divide 1 through the fire time. So this will be the number of shots we can fire within 1 second. And then we can multiply that with the damage output from the get weapon damage. So if we drag off here and multiply it with this result, that will return the correct DPS. So then we can use a format text again and use the toText float again as well. So we can plug it in over here and then simply say DPS and plug in the result in over here. So that will take care of the DPS one, and then all we have left is the ammo ones, and I don't think I renamed them, so I didn't actually do that. So let's go back to the designer quickly. So this is going to be the text weapon ammo for the wheel. And then this is going to be the text weapon ammo maximum for the wheel. There we go. So go back to the graph, and first of all, let's set the normal one. So text weapon ammo wheel. Grab a set text node again. So this is all of the ammo the player has for the weapon. So I'm going to combine the clip and the stock together. So we're going to grab the weapon inventory from the player. And in here we can find the local weapon row name. So let's do find and then grab the weapon row name from the local variables. So this will return the index in the ammo arrays. So then we can grab the ammo clip player array and get a copy of this index and do the same thing for the ammo stock player. So also get a copy of this index, and we're going to add these two together. So add node, plug them in both, And that's going to be the result. So now we simply need to turn this integer into text, and it's going to do that automatically. So that's good to go. So this is all of the ammo the player has. And we want to plug this into the target, by the way. And then we want to set the maximum ammo as well. So let's duplicate this one more time and let's replace this node. So that's going to be the text weapon ammo maximum for the wheel. And in this case, we can simply grab the ammo values from the data table. So these are going to be the maximum ammo values. So again, I'm going to add the clip and the stock together and simply plug those in over here. So there we go. So that should pretty much do it. And that should make the widget populate with all of the correct values. So now we need to make sure we update the widget if we actually need to. So let's go to the event graph. And in here, first of all, we want to go to the unhoovered events. So we have these hoovered and unhoovered ones. So we want to go to unhoovered, and then let me double check. So we're gonna grab a branch, and we're gonna do that before we set this hovered slot index. So let's grab a branch in here, move this over, and then we're gonna check if we are selecting a weapon or not. So grab that one, plug it in over here. And if we are selecting a weapon, then we simply want to set the hovered slot index. And if we are not selecting a weapon, then we want to update the weapon info current. So we're going to drag in the new function. And after we updated it, we want to set the hovered slot index again. There we go. So that will update it for the unhoovered. And then we also have the hovered ones. And in here, we can simply grab the isSelecting weapon branch with the update weapon info current. And let's make a bit of room over here. So we're going to add the branch over here as well. Plug all 4 of them in here. And if we are not selecting a weapon, then we want to update the weapon info current. So that's good to go as well. Now there's 2 small things left. Let's go into the create selection menu. And let me grab my notes in here quickly. Create selection menu. So there's actually one small thing I forgot in the previous video. We want to go to the second for each loop over here that loops through the weapon inventory. And if that's completed, we want to make sure that we enable or disable our button 0, 1. So let's grab the button over here first. And let me explain. So this button 0, 1, that's this clear button over here. And if we right click and open the menu and there's nothing in the slot, we don't want this button to be enabled because there's nothing in the slot to clear. So we're gonna grab this button 1 over here, and then we're gonna grab the weapon loadout from the player. And we are gonna get the selection from slot. So get a copy and then grab the selection for slot from the variables. And we can simply compare this. So if this is not equal to empty, then we can set the button enabled. So set is enabled, and simply plug the result into the set enabled node. So this goes into the completed pin of the for each loop for the weapon inventory. So not the selection buttons, but the weapon inventory one. So this should fix the clear slot button. And then for this video, we also want to add the opacity for the border weapon info current. So we're going to drag in the border weapon info current. And if we create this selection menu, we want to set the render opacity for this border. So set render opacity, and we're going to make it more transparent so it doesn't mess up the rest of the view as much. So I'm going to set it to 0.2. Okay, so compile and save. That's the create selection menu. And then we also want to go to the close selection menu. And in here we want to reset the render opacity again, so we can simply go to the end over here. We are setting the selection button hovered, and then after that we can grab our border weapon info current, and we're going to set the render opacity again, and this time we're going to set it back to 1. There we go. Okay, so right now we should have a working info widget, so we can simply test this. Let's go in game. We can just test this solo. And if we open up the weapon wheel and hover one of the weapons, we can see the actual information of that weapon. So that's working. And then let me see. So if we right click, the border becomes transparent, and there's nothing over here. That's good to go. We could see if the clear button is working. So if we clear the slot and try again, the clear button is disabled right now. So that's good to go as well. If we hover an empty slot, it disappears. So I think we are good to go over here. So we have that part set up. Yeah, the usual stuff. And now we can start working on the replacement of the weapon if the inventory is full. So now that we have most of our, or not most, we have our actual weapon wheel working, there's only one thing left, and that's replacing the weapon if the weapon inventory is full. So right now I have my weapon inventory set to 5 weapons, and I'm carrying 3 right now. So for example, if I would pick up this auto pistol, that would make 4. The Maverick rifle would make 5. I already have the shotgun and the SMG, so those will simply give me ammo. So if I try to pick up the LMG, then it would actually say inventory full and nothing happens. So now I need to replace one of these weapons, and that's what we're gonna do next. So if I try to pick up a weapon now, it's gonna display a widget that tells me to pick one of the weapons to replace. I can select it, and then it will replace that weapon. So I hope that makes sense, and that's what we're gonna do now. So we want to go to the weapon wheel widget, and I'm actually going to reuse this widget. So there's quite a lot of things in here that we can simply reuse. So if we make a second widget just for the replacement menu, we would have to duplicate a lot of stuff. So what I'm going to do is create a boolean in here, and that's going to be the isReplaceWeapon menu boolean. So if that weapon menu boolean is true, that means the widget will be used as the replacement menu, and if it's false, it will be used as the weapon wheel widget. So we're simply going to change some functionalities around depending on that boolean. So let's start by adding that actual boolean. Let's go to the variables, and we're going to add one, and this is going to be the isReplaceWeapon menu. Over here. So we're going to set this to instance editable and expose on spawn. Then we need a few extra inputs for this. So let's add those first. So we can duplicate this name variable, and this is going to be the pickup weapon name. Again, make this instance editable and expose on spawn. Then we can grab a integer over here, or actually let's grab an integer, not an array, sorry, and I'm going to duplicate that as well. This is going to be the pickup ammo clip. Again, instance editable exposed on spawn. Let's duplicate this one, and this is going to be the pickup ammo stock. Again, instance editable and exposed on spawn. And the last one we need is another name variable. So this is going to be the pickup player current weapon. This needs to be a name, but this one does not need to be instance editable and expose on spawn. So you can disable those if you copy them from over here. So this pickup prefix simply indicates this variable is used for the replace menu, and then behind that it tells what the actual variable is. So that's what those variables do. Then we want to go into the update for the weapon info current widget, and we want to start setting up some stuff. So for the designer, the weapon info current widget is this one. So if we have the weapon wheel open, it displays the information of the hovered slot. If we have the replace weapon menu, this is simply going to replace the information of the weapon that we are replacing. So the one we are hovering inside of the replacement menu. So we want to change that functionality. So we want to go into the update weapon info current function. And in here, we're going to add an input to the actual function. So let's go to the beginning over here. And we want to add the replace weapon name. So let's add an input, replace weapon name. That's a name variable. Then we need a little bit of room over here. So first of all, we're going to grab a branch. And we're going to check if we are in the replace menu or the weapon wheel. So let's grab the is replace weapon menu boolean, plug it in here. So if the bool is false, we can simply continue to the previous setup. So this means we are in the weapon wheel widget. And if it's true, we are in our new widget. So then we're going to set the local weapon row name over here, plug it into the replace weapon name. So this goes into the true pin. And then we simply want to go and plug this right into the set visible for the border weapon info current. So we can skip the check for the hovered slot index because we are not in the weapon wheel widget, so we are not hovering a slot. So let's plug it in here, and then this will take care of the rest. So that should be the weapon info current function. Let me double check quickly. Yes, that's good to go. So then we want to go to the event graph, and in here we need to change a bunch of things as well. So where are we going to start? Let me double check. So let's start with the event construct over here. So we have a second branch in here, checks all buttons empty. And before that one, we actually want to add a second branch. So let's grab a branch. And we're going to move this stuff over and move this out of the way for now. So let's just get rid of it. There we go. So we have a new branch in here. We have the isFirstConstruct, set the player character, the other pin doesn't do anything. So for this branch, we're going to check if we are inside of the replace weapon menu. So let's grab that boolean, plug it in here. And then we also want to add one little thing in this isFirstConstruct branch. So for that one, we want to set the default position for the selection menu. And for that, we actually need a vector 2D. So let's create a new variable. And we're going to call this our, let me see, selection menu default position. So selection menu default position, and turn it into a vector 2D. There we go. So we're going to set that over here inside of the isFirstConstruct branch, plug it in. And for this, we want to grab our selection box from the variables. So over here, selection box. And we want to get this slot as a canvas slot. So drag off here, slot as canvas slot. And if we have that, we can get the position. So drag off here and get position. So for that result, we're going to plug it into the default position. And that should be good. Now we can connect this back up to the branch. There we go. So the selection box is simply this widget over here. So selection box, and we're setting this default position if we open up the widget for the first time. So if we are not in the replace weapon menu, we want to grab our weapon wheel and we want to make sure that's visible. So let's go to the designer. So this actual weapon wheel part right now, we always have it set to visible, and we actually need to make sure that we can hide it as well. So we can do that by simply turning it into a variable for the border. So do we actually have a border in here? No, we only have a size box. That should work as well. So let's just rename the size box. We're going to call this the box weapon wheel. And we need to make sure it's a variable. And then by default, we're going to leave it to non-hit testable. So that's good to go. And then we can go back to the graph and simply grab our box weapon wheel, and we want to set the visibility. So if we are inside the weapon wheel menu, we want to make sure it's visible. So set visibility. For the false pin, make sure it's visible. Then we have our button 01, and we want to set the correct text for this button. So we actually don't need the button itself, but the text. So let's go to text button 1. Set the text for the button. And if we are in the weapon wheel widget, this button needs to say clear. So we use it to clear a slot. And then the last thing we want to do is grab our border weapon info current. And make sure we set this to hidden. So set visibility. So this might still be visible from the replace weapon menu, so we want to make sure we hide this if we open up the weapon wheel. And so that's really all of the special stuff we need to do for the weapon wheel menu. So now we can grab this and plug it back into the stuff that we moved to the side. So all buttons empty, and then populating the weapon wheel slot buttons. And for the other branch, if we are in the replace weapon menu, we need to do a bunch of more stuff. So first of all, let's grab these nodes over here and let's copy and paste them. So the box weapon wheel, we want to set it to hidden. Then for the text button 1, we're going to change it into current. So I'm going to make it that if we press this button, it will simply replace the current selected weapon. So you don't have to mess around looking for the correct weapon inside of the names. So this is simply a little quality of life thing. If you quickly want to replace the current weapon, you can simply press current. So that's what this thing does. And then we have a text for the selection header. So that should be in the variables as well, text selection header. Let's drag that in here as well, and we want to set that text. So let's grab a set text node, plug it in, and for the replace weapon menu, I want this to say replace weapon. So replace weapon. And then we want to make a few things visible. So we want to grab the selection box, drag it in here. We want to grab the border for the weapon info pickup and the weapon info current. So weapon info pickup and current, plug in all three of them and make sure these are set to visible as well. And this was set to hidden, so that's good to go. Now we are going to grab the selection box again. And for the selection box, we want to get the slot as canvas slot again. And then we can set the position. Plug it in here. So we're going to set it to the default position. So go in here, grab the default position from the variables and plug it in here. So if we are in the weapon wheel and we right click over here, for example, we move the selection box to this location and display it over here. So if we open up the replace weapon menu, I want it to be right next to the mouse cursor in the center of the screen. So you can simply go a little bit to the right and select the weapon and don't have to look for the position of the weapon box before you replace it. So it's simply a bit neater and again a quality of life. So we set it to the default position, then we are going to create the selection menu. So we can simply grab our function, create selection menu, and plug it in over here. Then we need to store the current weapon of the player. So we can go to the variables, we have the pickup player current weapon. We're going to drag it in here and simply store it so that we don't have to refer to the player every time we want to grab this name variable. So we can grab the weapon loadout from the player. So that's in our variables in here. And in the loadout, we can get a copy. And then we simply want to get a copy from the player character's active weapon index. So drag in your player character and then get the active weapon index and plug that into the loadout and store it in the variable. So we have that ready and good to go as well. Now we want to update our weapon info cards. So let's go to the functions. First, let's update the weapon info current. Drag it in here. And for this one, we actually want to plug in the player weapon. So the pickup player current weapon. And then we're going to update the weapon info for the pickup over here. And we actually need to call this function twice every time because we need to compare values in here. And to compare something, we need two values. So the first one, we're going to update the equipped weapon. And we're going to plug in the player pickup current weapon again. So let's grab that from the variables. Pickup player current weapon. And then the second one, we want to leave the checkbox false. And this time we want to plug in the pickup weapon row name. So that's the actual weapon we are picking up or are about to pick up. And this is the weapon the player is currently wielding in the active slot. Okay, so this should be good to go. And this should make the menu appear correctly if we open up the selection menu instead of the weapon wheel. Then we want to do a few other small things inside of this event graph as well. So first of all, the cancel button, if we click that, we want it to behave differently if we are inside of the selection menu. So let's look for the button cancel and go to our onClicked event. So if we press cancel, we want to check in what menu we are. So we're going to grab a branch and then plug in our is replace weapon menu. Nope. So if this is false, we can simply close the selection menu. And if this is true, we are going to close the entire weapon wheel. So then we want to go to our player character. And from the player character, we can get our shooter player controller. And then simply call UI close weapon wheel. So plug this into the true pin. And then we can plug in our player character in here as well. So that's good to go. And then there is one more thing in the event graph, and that's if we hover our slot buttons. So we want to go to our selection button hovered event over here. And these are the actual buttons that we are creating inside of this selection menu. And if we hover over them, we want this info card to update. So we know what weapon we are replacing and what the statistics are and all of that stuff. So again, we want to know in what menu we are first. So we're going to grab a branch and plug it in here. Grab our is replace weapon menu, plug it into the condition. So if this is false, we can simply plug it back in and that's good to go. And if we are in the selection menu, then we want to update our weapon info current. So let's drag in that one first. Plug it into the true pin. And for the current weapon, we can grab the weapon row name from the event over here. And then we want to update this part again. So let's copy and paste them. So make sure first you update the equipped weapon and the last one is the not equipped one. And then For the equipped one, we can grab it from the event and plug it in here. And the other one is actually the pickup that we are picking up. So that's from the variables, the pickup weapon name over here, and plug it in. So not the pickup player current weapon, but the weapon we are picking up, so the pickup weapon name. So that should look like this. Okay, so we have this part done. And now we want to go into the create selection menu, so we actually create the correct buttons for replacing a weapon. So let's open up the create selection menu function. And in here we want to add a few branches as well. So if we go down the line a little bit, we have a switch on int over here, and we check the weapon types for the correct slots. So we don't need to do that inside of the selection menu. So right before the switch on int, we're going to grab a branch, plug it in, and we're going to check if we are in the replace weapon menu. So if this is false, we're going to plug it back into the switch on integer. If this is true, we're going to skip these checks and simply create the widget. So we're always going to create a widget inside of the replace menu. So for example, we can have a weapon inventory on the player that only has primary weapons. If the player wants that, that's fine, but he can simply not assign one in the secondary weapon slot. So that's what this part does. But if we are making the replace menu, we obviously just want to show all of the weapons in the inventory. So we're going to skip this check. And then right at the end, we also want to make sure that we skip this check inside of the weapon menu, the replace menu. So this disables any weapons that are equipped in the loadout. And that's obviously not desired if we want to replace a weapon inside of our loadout. So we're going to add another branch in here. And then if this branch is false, plug it back into the next one. And again, check for the replace weapon menu boolean. So that's good to go. And then we want to go to the completed pin of the for each loop over here. And again, we want to check in what menu we are. So we're going to grab a branch and move this over and check if we are in the replace weapon menu. So if it's false, plug it back into the previous setup. There we go. And if it's true, we always want to enable our button 1. So we can simply copy and paste this over here and set it to enabled. And then we want to grab the render opacity for the weapon info current, and we're going to set this to 1 as well. So copy and paste the node and set the opacity to 1 for the replace weapon menu. And so this one is good to go as well. And now there is only the on key up event left. So if we actually press the weapon wheel button inside of the replace menu, we don't want anything to happen because that's not related to each other. So let's go to the on key up event, and then we're simply going to add a branch over here. So the first thing we're going to do is check the current menu we are in. And we want to grab the replace weapon menu boolean. So if we are in the weapon wheel, we're going to plug it back into the condition. And if this is true, we're simply going to plug it into the unhandled pin. So we're not going to do anything if we press the weapon wheel button when we have the replace menu open. So compile and save. So that should pretty much be the widget part. Now we want to go into the player controller to make sure that we actually pass on all of the new exposed on spawn variables. So let's go to our framework folder and open up our shooter player controller. And in here, go to UI open weapon wheel. Now let me switch my nodes quickly as well. There we go. Oh, bear with me for a second. Yes, I'm back. So we have these new pins on the create widget node. And first we simply want to pass them on to the function. So we can simply drag them onto the node over here. to create new inputs for us. So that was easy, but we also want to make sure that we set them over here if we reconstruct the widget without actually using the create widget node. So if we removed it from the viewport and add it back again, we want to make sure we update the variables. So we can simply set them by dragging off the weapon wheel, and then we're going to set our isReplaceWeaponMenu boolean. So we already have these setters over here, and we can simply hook them up at the end. So let's disconnect the weapon inventory one, plug it into the new one, and then we also want to set the pickup weapon name. So pickup weapon name, plug it in here, and then we want to set the pickup ammo for the clip, and also the pickup ammo stock. And then we can plug it back into the add to viewport pin. So make sure we connect everything up in here and that we actually plug in the inputs from the function, the ammo clip and the ammo stock. There we go. So that should make everything work in the player controller. And now we obviously also need something inside of our character to make sure that we populate these variables. So let's compile and save, and let's go into the base character. So let's open that one up, and we're going to create a new custom event in here. So let's grab a little bit of empty room, and let's go near the input action weapon wheel. So let's create a custom event, and I'm going to call this one create replace weapon menu. So first of all, we want to make sure that we execute this on the owning client. So replicates and then run on owning client. Then we are going to grab the stuff from the input action weapon wheel and simply paste it over here. So we want to open up our weapon wheel widget, and we also want to pass on all of the variables that we already had in here. Then we're going to tick the isReplaceWeaponMenu boolean over here, so enable that one, and the other three variables are going to be passed on to the event. So we can simply drag them onto the event node and pass them on. So that should be good to go as well. Compile and save this one. And now the final piece that ties everything together is the pickup weapon. So we want to go to the gameplay loot folder and then open up our pickup weapon. So there we go. And in here we actually left a branch empty. So if we go to the beginning, a local empty slot found is false. We added this print over here. And this is where we actually want to create our replace weapon menu. The only thing we need to do is plug in some ammo values. So we need to get those first. So what we're going to do is let's disconnect the print and we're going to get a table row. And then we want to get our weapon info table and simply plug in our weapon row name to add. So that's not a local variable, but the normal variable from the pickup over here. Then we can break the weapon info like this. So first of all, if we are setting these ammo values on the pickup to -1, if we place a pickup in a level, that means we are actually giving the player full ammo. So we want to grab a branch and plug it into the row found pin. And we're going to check if the loaded ammo clip is -1. So drag off here, compare to -1. So if this is true, we want to give the player maximum ammo. And if this is false, we want to use the ammo value inside of this variable. So we can use our local current clip and local current stock variables, because we are not executing all of this stuff, so we're not using them now. So we can simply change the use of them over here, and I'm gonna set my local current clip, drag it in here, plug it into the true pin, And if this is true, we can grab the ammo value from the data table. And if this is false, then we simply want to plug in our loaded ammo clip and plug it into the local one. So we want to do the same thing for the stock. So we're going to grab another branch and plug in both of these. Then we're going to grab the loaded ammo stock and compare it. So if this is -1, we want to add max ammo. And if this is another value, we simply want to add that value. So we're going to grab our local current stock. For the true pin, grab the value from the data table. And for the false pin, grab the value from the loaded ammo stock. And then we can call our create replace weapon menu on the player character. And the player character is actually an input in this pickup event. So let's drag off here. And then simply call create replace weapon menu. Plug it in here. So we can plug in our local current stock and local current clip values. And the pickup weapon name is the weapon row name to add. So plug that in here as well. Okay, so this should be good to go. So right now, if we try to pick up a weapon and the inventory is full, this widget should appear and all of the buttons and stuff in the widget should actually work and display the correct information. So the only part that is missing right now is when we click one of the buttons, the weapon will actually replace. But first of all, let's make sure that the other part is working. So I'm going to try and pick up 3 weapons, the auto pistol, the rifle, and the LMG. And right now I get my new menu. So in here it displays my current weapon, the RK7X. So that's correct. Over here it displays the weapon I'm about to pick up. So that's correct as well. And then it displays the damage and all of the other stuff. So weirdly enough, my DPS on my LMG is lower than the pistol. That's because the pistol fire rate is really high, but it's not automatic. So in the end, it kind of makes sense, but it really doesn't also. So everything seems to be pretty much working. There's only one thing I see on the right side where the ammo from the player is not updating over here. Sorry, that's not the player's ammo, that's the loaded ammo from the picked up weapon. So the player ammo is actually updating over here. So we might need to look into this, but other than that, it kind of looks good. So none of these buttons actually work except the cancel button, and that will close the menu. So now let's set up the actual functionality of the buttons and try and fix the ammo issue. So the ammo not displaying correctly might actually be something I forgot, because that's also not working in my example project. So let's try and fix it on the fly. If we go to the weapon wheel widget, this shouldn't be too hard. So inside of the update weapon info pickup event over here, we are setting the text weapon ammo selection. So that's the one we need to update if we are in the selection menu. So this is for the weapon wheel, and then we are getting the ammo values from the player inventory, and we don't want to do that. So let's grab a branch in here and hook this up. So we want to check if we are in the replace weapon menu. If this is false, we're simply going to grab the previous text setter and make sure we use the weapon inventory. And if this is true, then we can simply grab the values from the variables. So this gets a little bit messy, or not a little bit, but a lot. There we go. So then we can grab the pickup ammo clip and the pickup ammo stock, and we can add those together, and then grab a toText node for an integer and plug that in over here. So that should make the ammo display correctly. Make sure you plug this back into the text weapon ammo maximum setter, so it will continue execution as well. So I think that will fix that issue. So let's check that later, compile and save. So let's make the replacement buttons work. And to do that, we want to start inside of the weapon pickup. So let's go to loot, weapon pickup. And in here, inside of the pickup function, we want to add an input. So let's go all the way to the beginning of the function. And over here, we're actually going to add a boolean and an index. So let's add a new input to the function. That's on the right side. The first one is force replace. So is force replace. And then the second one is the replace weapon index. And that's an integer. So if this boolean is true, then we are not going to check anything. We're simply going to add the weapon to this weapon slot. So that's what this boolean does. So we're going to grab a branch. The first thing we do, plug it in here, plug in the force replace boolean. If it's false, continue like we used to. And if it's true, we're going to grab the local variable for the weapon slot. So let me see. Local weapon inventory slot. And plug it into the true pin. Plug in the replace weapon index. And then we're also going to grab our local is item picked up and set it to true over here. And then we simply want to plug this into the add weapon to inventory node. So we can go all the way to the right. Over here, server add weapon to inventory, simply plug it in here directly. Like so. So that should be good to go. And now if we enable this boolean, it will skip all of the checks and simply replace that weapon. So now we want to go to the event graph and create a custom event for this. So let's create a new custom event. And I'm going to call this pickup replace weapon. Pickup replace weapon. So we actually want to call all of this stuff. So let's copy and paste it over here. The replace weapon index and the player character, we want to pass those on. And for the force replace, we want to simply enable this manually. So set this to true. And then that should be good to go. So we can compile and save the pickup. Then we need to go into our base character. So we can actually call this. So let's go to hero base. And in here we want to add a new custom event again that we can call from the widget if we click one of the buttons and then tell the server to call the replace weapon event. So we're going to create a new custom event. And let's call this one server replace weapon. So we're going to call this from a widget. So that's the owning client. And we need to pass this onto the server. So we're going to run on server. Then we want to give this one input, and that's the replace weapon index. That's an integer. So first of all, we want to grab our interactable actor from our variables over here. So let's look for that interactable actor. So if we are calling this, we already interacted with a pickup because the pickup is the only thing that can actually open the replace weapon menu. And this will be called from that replace weapon menu. So we are going to assume that we are interacting with a weapon pickup. And to make sure, we're going to drag off the interactable actor and we're going to do is valid. So make sure we actually have an interactable actor at this moment. And then we're also going to drag over here and we're going to cast it to our weapon pickup. So BPC pickup weapon, the child blueprint, not the parent. And because we are casting to the child, we can now call our pickup replace weapon. So let's call the new function that we just created. For the player character, that's going to be a reference to ourselves. And the weapon index, we can plug it into the event over here. So that's good to go as well. We now have an event we can call from the widget and the server will handle the rest. So we need to go back into our weapon wheel widget and make sure we actually call this. So let's go to the event graph. And then there are two buttons we want to take care of. So we have the, let's go to the event graph first. So we have the button 01 over here. That's going to replace our current weapon. And then we also have the select weapon for slot. And this is called if we click one of the selection buttons. So those are the selection button widgets over here that we are creating and that we are using to populate the selection menu. So those buttons call this function event. Sorry. So what we want to do is make sure we have a little bit of room to work with. So let's start with button 01. If we press this, we want to know in what menu we are. So we're going to grab a branch and plug in our is replace weapon menu. So if we are in the weapon wheel, we're going to do what we did previously. And if we are in the replace weapon menu, we can grab our player character and simply call server replace weapon. Replace weapon. So this goes into the true bin. And then for the index, we want to grab the player inventory. So the weapon inventory from the player over here. And we want to find, so drag off the weapon inventory, use a find node, and we want to find the current weapon from the player. So if we have our pickup player current weapon, plug it in over here, that will return the correct slot, plug it in over here, and after that we are going to close the menu. So we can simply drag off here and get our shooter player controller. And from the player controller, call UI close weapon wheel. Plug that in over here. And then we can plug in the player character like so. So that's the replace current slot. And then for the other ones, we want to do pretty much the same thing. So we can just copy and paste this over here, to be honest. Move down here. So if we click one of these buttons, we want to check what menu we are in. If we are in the weapon wheel, plug it back into the previous setup. If we are in the replacement menu, we can do this stuff again, but this time we want to find not the current weapon from the player, but the one from the button that we pressed. So we're going to use the weapon row name from the button that we pressed, find it in the player's inventory and pass on that index. And then close the menu. So that's good to go as well. So I think we have most of it done. There are a few small things inside of the base character to tie things up, and then everything should be working. So let's go back into our hero base character. And first of all, we want to look at the server assign weapon to loadout event. So we should have that over here somewhere. We created that in one of the previous episodes. So this executes to run on server, and right now we also want to add one that is not replicated because we're going to call that from the server anyway. So that will save us a replicated event. So what we can do is simply create a new custom event and call this assign weapon to loadout. Then let's disconnect. No, let's not disconnect them. Okay, so let's not disconnect them. Let's just drag one of these pins on here. So this is going to be the loadout index. And then we can move over the other pins as well. So we have all of them connected. And then we also want to add the weapon row name. So let's drag it on here, for example, and change it into the weapon row name. And move over the other pins. And now we should be good to go. So we can replace this event, and then from the server one, we're going to call the normal one. So assign weapon to loadout and pass on the variables. So right now, if we call the server event, this will make it run on server, and we also have a normal event that's not replicated. So with that setup, we want to go into the server, add weapon to inventory. And first of all, we're going to go all the way to the beginning. And before we actually make any changes inside of the inventory array, we're going to store the old weapon name. So let's drag this to the side a little bit. And we're going to create a new local variable. And that's going to be the local old weapon name. So local old weapon name. And we want to simply set it first. So that's, we need to change it into a name variable. Sorry. Then we're going to set it. So drag it in here, plug it back over in here. And we want to simply grab the weapon inventory from the player. So not the loadout, but the inventory. And we're going to get a copy from this inventory slot. So that's the slot we are replacing over here. So we have the old weapon row name stored. Then we're going to go all the way to the back of this function. And let's disconnect the return node. So over here, we want to check if we actually removed a weapon from the inventory that we had assigned to our loadout. So in other words, that was assigned to the weapon wheel, because in that case, we need to update some stuff. So we're going to grab a branch in here, and we're going to grab our local old weapon name. Now the first thing we can do is check if it's empty or not. So let's do a not equal to, and if it's not empty, so that's going to be our first condition. Then we also want to grab a local variable for the loadout index. So again, create a local variable old loadout index. So this is an integer. And we want to set it over here for the true pin. So if the weapon we replaced is not empty, so there was actually a weapon in there, we're going to grab the weapon loadout. And in here we want to find an item. And that's going to be our old weapon name. And plug the return in here. So we didn't update our weapon loadout array yet, because we only replaced the inventory array, not the loadout array. So we can simply find if it's still in here or not. So if this is greater than or equal to 0, it's actually in here. So drag off, do greater than or equal to, plug it in. So if this is false, then we can simply return. We don't need to do anything. And we can also grab the previous false pin and plug it into the return node as well. So in those cases, there's nothing to worry about. Now, if this is true, we do need to make some changes. So then we're going to grab our old loadout index. And we want to switch on integer. Plug it into the true pin. And we're going to add slot 0, 1, and 2, because those are the only weapon slots. So we can get rid of the default pin, don't really need it. And then we want to grab our weapon type from our weapon info table. So we already have the weapon info table in here. We're going to drag off the weapon type, go all the way over here. And again, we're going to switch on an enum. So switch on the weapon type. And we actually need 2 of these nodes. So we're going to plug one of them into the 0 slot. So that's for the secondary weapons. And then we're going to copy and paste it. Again, plug in the weapon type from the weapon row data table. So the second one goes into slot 0 and 1. So these are for the primary weapons. And now we need to set it up. So if we put a correct weapon in the replacement slot, we're going to update the loadout, and otherwise we're going to leave that slot empty. So for example, in slot 0, if I replaced a weapon that was in that slot and I replace it with a secondary weapon, then I actually want to assign that new secondary weapon to the slot as well. So then I'm going to call my assign weapon to loadout, not the server one, but the normal one. For the loadout index, I'm going to plug in my old loadout index. And then the weapon row name is going to be the weapon row name all the way from the beginning of the event function. So simply the new weapon that we are adding. Now, if we did the same thing, but we replaced it with a primary weapon, then we're simply going to set this loadout slot to empty. So copy and paste it, plug these into the primary pin. And then for the weapon row name, we want to set that to empty. So we can make a literal name and then simply type empty. There we go. Now, if we replaced one of the primary weapons, we want to do this in reverse. So if we replaced it with a primary, then we want to update it with the new weapon. And if we replaced it with a secondary, we're going to set the slot to empty. So that's how those should be hooked up. And then we are good to go in this function. So we can hook those back up to the return node. And this part will update the loadout with the new weapon or simply assign an empty slot. So compile that. And we actually messed something up in here. Oh, it simply didn't update the name. So let's refresh the node and then plug it back in. And that should be good to go. There we go. So we have add weapon to inventory done as well. So now there is only one thing left to do. And that's over here. Switch to weapon index, our rep notify. So if we're gonna find references over here. So with rep notify, if the variable does not change, the rep notify will not fire for clients, only on the server. And in this case, if we replace a weapon inside of our weapon wheel with a new weapon, we do actually want to switch to it, but we're not changing slots. So we want to make sure that we replace this integer with a boolean, and that boolean is simply going to tell us to initiate the weapon switching, and we're going to use the correct index from the active weapon index. So we're simply going to make it so we can switch to the same slot, and that will still trigger the weapon switching animation. And to do that, we need to get rid of this integer over here. So we're going to create a new boolean to actually trigger our weapon switching. So create a new variable. I'm going to call it rep switch weapon. Turn it into a bool. And then change it replication to rep notify. So the rep notify will create the on rep switch weapon event. So let's set that up first. So let's double click it, on rep switch weapon. And in here we simply want to call switch weapon over here. Now if we go to this switch weapon event, the first thing we want to do in here is get rid of this variable over here and replace it with our active weapon index. No, not a setter, but a getter. Over here. And then we need to go to the setters of the old integer, and we want to replace those with the booleans. So let me go to my notes quickly. So yeah, that shouldn't be too hard. So we can simply get rid of this over here. And then we're going to grab our new boolean rep switch weapon. We want to set it, and then we're going to get it and flip it around. So drag it in here, grab a not bool and plug it in. So that's for the server side. And then we want to go to server switch weapon, and in here we want to do the same thing. So we're going to get rid of this integer, plug in our active weapon index, and then switch weapons. There we go. So we can get rid of this as well. And make sure we actually have integers hooked up over here. So you want to set the active weapon first and then switch weapon, and over here as well. So make sure you set the active weapon index and then trigger switch weapon. So previously we used this integer to determine the new slot, and we already changed it in the previous episode that we are setting this integer right at the beginning of the switching weapons. So now we can use this integer to simply determine that slot. And we can get rid of this variable entirely. So there shouldn't be any references left. No, they're not. So we can simply delete this. Is in use? No, I don't think it's in use, but that's probably because of the rep notify function. So let's compile and save, find references. Let's make sure. Oh, it is actually used inside of our pickup. That's awesome. So, oh, it's not used, it's already disconnected, so we can get rid of this bunch. Compile and save. Go back to the hero base character, and now we can delete it without any issues, and then go all the way up. And we have onRep rep switch to weapon index, so we can get rid of this one as well because the variable is gone. So compile and save, and I think we should be good to go. So let's close everything down, make sure everything is saved in case of a horrible crash. And let's make sure everything is working. So let's go into a solo game, free-for-all match. And again, I'm gonna try and pick up 3 weapons and see what happens. So we have 5 weapons right now. I want to pick up the LMG. I'm getting the correct menu. So it looks like we have the ammo issue fixed as well. Now let me simply try and replace it with my shotgun, for example. So that's a weapon that I have on my back as well. So select the shotgun in here and nothing actually happens. So that's awesome. In here, oh wait. It might have actually changed, but the shotgun looks quite a lot like the LMG, so I might just not have noticed it, possibly. Let's do a quick second test. So let's go back again. I'm sorry. So how are we gonna do this? We're gonna pick up the LMG first, then we're gonna pick up the pistol, and then I'm gonna pick up the Maverick. So replace the shotgun with the Maverick. It does actually change. Okay, nice. So I simply didn't notice it because the weapons are really much alike. So we have the new weapon. It's automatically assigned to our weapon wheel, and our holstered weapon changed as well. So everything updates. And as you can see, the shotgun is gone. So all of that stuff is working. And I think we should be good to go, to be honest. So we have all of our weapon wheel stuff done. Except for the equipment, but we need to actually set up equipment first. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. It was a pretty long one, I think. If you did, please consider leaving a like, and I'll be back soon for more. Talk to you later, guys. Bye bye.